Hello, I'm Tom Owen. I'm an archivist and local historian at the University of Louisville. I want to walk today with you in public space. This is Government Center. We're concentrating at 6th and Jefferson in downtown Louisville. We see evidenced here a city spirit. We see the will and the vigor and the vision of people who were committed to this city over many, many, many years. Our local government's been at this intersection since the early pioneer times. Our first courthouse was on this corner in 1784. By the early 1830s, over on the City Hall corner, there was a Jefferson County courthouse and a county court clerk's office. And then on the courthouse side, the Jefferson County courthouse side of today, there was a Jefferson County jail. But it hasn't always been pretty here. This has been the center for demonstration, for grievance, for the presentation of exclusion and the complaint about exclusion. There have been public lynchings here. We see on this corner historically that the old city whipping post for the exacting of punishment, or for the stocks, the pillory, where people who were nonconformists were held up for ridicule and criticism. There were pro-slavery and anti-slavery demonstrations here. So this is what I call the Government Center. Public space since 1784. And I'm looking forward to being with you today to see the testimony that remains of this Louisville's past. Now let me show you the person for whom Louisville is named. This is King Louis, King of France. Oh, how old do you have to be to drive a car in the state of Kentucky? Well, at least get a permit at age 16. So this is Louis XVI. He was the King of France, a very symbol, an embodiment of the old regimes of Europe. What are we as American revolutionaries doing, getting tied up with the very symbol of the autocracy of old Europe? Well, I'll tell you. The revolutionary leaders of America were nobody's fool. They knew that they were like little David coming up against King Goliath. That's King George III, against whom we were fighting our revolution for freedom. So they reached for their slingshot, but they did more. They sent poor Richard himself. You know poor Richard, Benjamin Franklin. Sent him to see this king at his palace at Versailles. Versailles. Knocked on the door, Benjamin Franklin did, and in my imagination, that King Louis came to that big wooden door, popped open that slot, looked out there and said, "Franklin? Benjamin Franklin? Is that you?" "Yes, Your Majesty." You see, King Louis XVI was very familiar with Benjamin Franklin because he had been hanging around in the salons of Paris decade or so before the revolution broke out. A familiar face in Paris. "Get off of my front porch, Franklin," the king declared. "You're tied up with those crazy revolutionaries in America." Franklin persisted. But Your Majesty, you do know who we're fighting against." With that, there was silence. This king, who hated and feared revolutions and revolutionaries, hated only one thing more: England. And so the big door on the palace at Versailles opened, and Benjamin Franklin went in. 1778 was the year. The very year that this lonely end of the wilderness road frontier outpost began. 1778. In the discussion that day, King Louis XVI agreed to help us in our revolution. He committed military hardware, diplomatic assistance in the capitals of Europe. Troops were dispatched from Haiti to help us in our revolution. Military leadership in the form of Marquis de Lafayette and others, all were committed by the king. Out here at the end of the wilderness road when we heard the news that King Louis was sending help for our revolution, we kicked up our heels with joy and briefly began to speak French. We didn't know what to name this new Into the Wilderness Road community. We were thinking of naming it Beargrass, maybe Falls of the Ohio. I think they should have considered Rapid City. But nevertheless, when they heard the word the king was sending help, they started speaking French to name this place Louis. Hit the space bar on the computer. Second word, a French word, V-I-L-L-E. Ville, the town or village of Louis. How old do you have to be to drive a car in the state of Kentucky? 16. We have honored this king in several other ways. Does anybody know his family's last name? Famille de Bourbon. All the whiskey made in Kentucky is named for the family of this king. Bourbon. Famille de Bourbon. Does anybody know the symbol of the Bourbon kings of Europe? See it on his robe? All over his robe, the fleur-de-lis. That's the lily flower. In 1948, we literally just took that symbol of the Bourbon family of kings and made it the symbol of the city of Louisville. This statue, you know how we got it? Oh, that's a story in its own right. Our French sister city, Montpellier, was a center of royal activity after this king. It was during a period which is called the Restoration. And this king's sister was coming to visit our sister city in the 1820s. And they announced on her arrival that they had commissioned Valois to sculpt a grand statue of Louis XVI to sit on the town square in Montpellier. It was completed in 1827. But unfortunately, the Bourbon kings were toppled by 1830, and it was no longer stylish to be associated with the old kings again. And so as a result, they put the statue in a box, and it remained in the basement of a fort until 1899. They at least got it out of the box in Montpellier and set it in a corner, a hidden corner of the museum there. And then in 1967, as a gift to our city, Montpellier decided to send it over to us, and we set it up here on this corner. You know, there's a sad footnote to this story. This king, who hated and feared revolutions, lost his head to Dr. Guillotine's newfangled head-removing machine. He was beheaded during the terror of the French Revolution. Let me show you something. This fat baby angel, I call that a cherub, is holding the crown. I don't know the meaning. Maybe the meaning is the Bourbon kings were thinking about the succession of dynasty. The king had been beheaded. There's going to be a new king after the failure of Napoleon, the restoration of the Bourbon kings, and maybe this cherub holding in French the testament or the will of the king, Testamente du Roi, is talking about that succession of the Bourbon dynasty from the French Revolution into the time of restoration of the Bourbons from 1815 to 1830. Come on, let me show you Thomas Jefferson Street. This main street is named for Thomas Jefferson. Oh, there are so many things named in this community for Thomas Jefferson. This is Thomas Jefferson Street. We're soon going to see the Thomas Jefferson County Courthouse. This is Thomas Jefferson County. Across the river from downtown Louisville is Thomas Jeffersonville. Out in the suburbs in the southeast is Thomas Jefferson Town. He was our governor. I can see some folks kind of shaking their heads. No, he was so our governor. For you see, there was no Kentucky until 14 years after we began as a community. We were part of Virginia when we began. This was Louisville, Virginia, and we held that status until 1792. And when the community was just 2 years old, 1780, our state government, meeting in Richmond, just up the road from Williamsburg, created 3 new Virginia counties this side of the Allegheny Mountains. They named one for Lincoln. He was a New Jersey war general. Abraham Lincoln wasn't born yet. They named another county for, does anybody know where the county seat of Marquis de Lafayette County is? Big Blue, Lexington is the seat of Marquis de Lafayette County, created in 1780 by the Virginia Assembly. Got tired of just saying Marquis de Lafayette County, and now we say simply Fayette County. And the third county created was named in 1780 for the governor himself, Thomas Jefferson. No wonder he signed the charter, making Louisville the county seat. That's why we're so tied up with Thomas Jefferson, because we were Virginians for the first 14 years of our life as a community. This Thomas Jefferson Street, this has been parade city historically in Louisville. Every protest, every military procession, every major celebratory event historically took place here on Jefferson Street through the government center into this public space. You know something else I found about this street? There used to be perpendicular parking, just like we have on East and West Market. This street's wide enough to allow cars to angle park at the curbing, which was news to me. Come on, let's see Thomas Jefferson himself. I need to tell you, this is my favorite public sculpture. This is the statue of Thomas Jefferson, donated to the community in 1900 by those 2 German Jewish distillers who had come to America and had done real well, Bernard and Isaac Bernheim. Isaac and his wife gave us also the Lincoln statue at the library, and Isaac and his wife also gave us that forest out near Shepherdsville, Bernheim Forest. They gave back to their community. Well, this gift was in 1900, and they write on the top of the Liberty Bell, and at the base of the Liberty Bell, what they're interested in seeing. They want to perpetuate the teaching and examples of the Founding Fathers. This statue, sculpted in Rome by Moses Ezekiel, was really intended at first. Both the donors and the sculptor agreed that the best place for it was in Central Park, out 4th Street in Old Louisville. Well, the piece was done, ready to be installed, but there was just one problem. The city hadn't bought Central Park yet. The deal wasn't completely done. And so they needed to put it somewhere, and so they decided instead to install it here in front of the Jefferson County Courthouse. They got around to a full dedication ceremony on July the 4th, 1901. There was a giant crowd of humans that gathered, and there was announced that day a public school essay contest endowed by the Bernheims with $10,000. And students were to compete in an essay every year on the ideas about democracy and liberty that Thomas Jefferson had espoused. This is the young Tom Jefferson speaking before the Continental Congress in 1776, meeting in Philadelphia. And he's holding and reading, announcing to the Assembly the Declaration of Independence that he had just written. The committee that he worked with had helped him fashion it. Well, Tom Jefferson is holding, at 33 years of age, the Declaration of Independence. He's standing on top the Liberty Bell. And out from the Liberty Bell are 4 favorite friends of mine. They are civic, I call them civic angels. This civic angel is the civic angel of equality. You know what she's doing? She's in the process of shredding documents. Here she's tearing up the law of primogeniture. Hello! Do you care that the revolution tore up the law of primogeniture? I hope you do. You know what it means. The old way in the old world was to give all of mama and daddy's things when they die to your ugly big brother, the eldest son in the family. You like that? I don't think so. She is ripping up the law. At her feet, there's the Stamp Act. Also at her feet is the law prohibiting the further importation of slaves into America from Africa. These and other documents have been shredded. Come around here. Let me show you the civic angel of justice. Oh, do we struggle even today to achieve a blindfolded, unbiased justice when the impassioned majority frequently rules, when in a democracy the majority feels like with their passion and in some cases their anger should rule. How precious, what an ideal, what a hope is to have a justice that is blind and is holding the sword of truth. There's power here in this Liberty Bell. Now, Thomas Jefferson also had some other strong beliefs. He worried and he fretted about the new republic because he feared that in the New England states, the Congregationalists, that's a branch of Protestantism, the Congregationalists would rule and control government. In Virginia, he feared that the Anglicans, with their pew taxes, would rule and control. Thomas Jefferson worried about religion in America. In 1786, if you squint, you can see the date, 1786, Jefferson's document on religious freedom. And what it espoused is that government should be a manager. Doesn't mean that government leaders can't be religious. In my judgment, it means and it inspires us to believe that government is committed to being what I think is like a owner of a cafeteria. Keeping the lights on and keeping the food and the service table clean. But letting people move freely without one religion, one denomination, one view being held above another, but let people move freely through the cafeteria line. You know, Moses, Ezekiel, and also Bernheim believe that too. Look at the names of the gods that are on this tablet. While I see God, Jehovah, Brahma, Atma, Ra, Allah, Zeus are among the religions that are captured here in this document on religious freedom. Jefferson's ideal. Around the corner here is probably the symbol of the Liberty Bell, the figure of Liberty herself. She's wearing the three-cornered hat, the tricorn, and she is holding a sword that has just cracked open the shackles of tyranny to show you the distance or the gap between the ideal and our reality. When 95-year-old Bernheim, Isaac Bernheim, wasn't living in Louisville anymore, he had to live in California for his health, he wrote back during the days of tyranny of Nazi rule in Europe, 1943. And he said, you know, the granite base that our Jefferson statue sits on, it's plain and unadorned. Will you set up a commission, and I'll pay for it, to select powerful words of Thomas Jefferson to be etched here on this granite base. They were dedicated, the new words on the base, words, powerful words about liberty from Jefferson. They were etched into the base and dedicated on July the 4th, 1943. But there's sometime a gap between Jefferson's high ideals of liberty and equality and harsh reality. For instance, the dedication ceremony, they were racially separate. There was a ceremony for whites and a ceremony that followed for African Americans in this racially segregated world. And Jefferson himself, a person who espoused ideas of equality, he never admitted to having fathered an African American child by a slave, Sally Hemings. In fact, members of Jefferson's family, white and black, to this day argue over which Jefferson should really come to dinner at Monticello, Jefferson's home. Let's move around this public space around the Jefferson County Courthouse. Let me show you the courthouse, though. This is the oldest public building in Louisville, by far. This palace of government was the inspiration of James Guthrie. In fact, the building was so large for its time, it was called Guthrie's Folly. You see, Guthrie was a president at U of L. He was even United States Treasurer in Washington. And you know, Guthrie's vision of a big oversized building that could attract state government was realized briefly during the Civil War when the state legislature, running from the rebels, had to hold their meeting here in the Jefferson County Courthouse. You see, James Guthrie's vision for the community was to build a building so grandiose that the state capitol could move from Frankfort to Louisville. In fact, in 1842 and then in the 1860s, there was a genuine, honest effort to try to achieve that. But there was a problem. Construction had begun, and by 1842, they just had to board up the old, what later became called the ancient ruin. They boarded up the upper windows of the building and just used the basement. Because the economic panic, the Depression of 1837 had occurred, this building, which symbolized our economic prosperity riding on the steamboat decades, suddenly ended up being an embarrassing, almost empty hulk for 22 years. They finally hired Albert Fink, a railroad bridge engineer for the L&N Railroad, to redo the plans and to finish the building, which was complete by the late 50s, right at 1860. This building is built to look like a Greek temple on purpose. It is in Greek Revival style, for you see, those who were involved in the earliest decades of the Republic were inspired by the notion of those ancient Greek city-states in the 5th and 6th century BC that had designed a government at least in which there was some citizen participation. And so they built churches and houses and palaces of government to look like Greek temples. There are a couple of small plaques I want to show you here on the public grounds. Let's move around. Now, you know, in January and a part of February in 1937, without a flood wall, this community experienced a devastating flood. That flood covered 3/4 of the inhabited portions of the city of Louisville. And there was a hero that came out of that flood who is honored in this plaque. His name was Pete Monroe. He was the head announcer at WHAS Radio. And he and his staff commanded battery-powered transmitters and broadcasting equipment. Pete Monroe, you've seen flood photos perhaps. He's the guy with the reporter's hat with the press sign tucked in his hatband. He maintained emergency radio broadcasts during the 1937 flood at one point for 188 continuous hours. The tragedy is that 29-year-old Pete Monroe, the hero, was dead by December 1937. He died of blood poisoning on his second anniversary in December of 1937. Over here is the monument dedicated by the War Mothers of America, the American War Mothers. Notice they dedicate this to the heroes of the World War. See, World War I. In the 1920s, they dedicated this monument to those 280 or so Jefferson Countyans who died during World War I. Let's go look at the monument that we created in this community for those Jefferson Countyans who died in World War II. This monument contains 1,450 names, from A to Z, Forrest Abel to Paul Zwick. We began with 60 names in a 35-foot wooden monument that was on or near this site that was dedicated in 1943. It just had 60 names on it. No granite, no marble, no bronze plaques. We were in a war emergency, and we had a wooden monument with the names of those who had died, and names were added as each month passed. These mostly young men in the prime of life, with futures never realized, their names are now on these bronze tablets, from Abel to Zwick. The message that has been etched in stone is powerful. It says, "They paid for peace. It is our duty to preserve it." A powerful message. May this monument be a constant reminder to the living to continue their struggle for peace. You know, this monument is not where it was intended to be. The planners, after World War II, organized a volunteer effort of donations to raise enough money to put this monument on top of Iroquois Hill. But there were some problems. They had planned in its design to put a Christian cross on top. Complaints began to rise. Does it lean too heavily in the Christian faith? 9 Christians have died here. Should a Christian cross be on top? Iroquois Hill was too remote. We weren't able to raise enough money. There were even donation pots right here on Jefferson Street where you could drop money in. And so the compromise location was back here on Courthouse Square, and it was dedicated on the coldest Pearl Harbor day in memory. But there's something I need to tell you. And I have asked and never found the answer. Why, out of alphabetical order, are these 2 names added to the list? Who was Jack A. Schwartz and William C. Whitley, Jr.? Did they die later? Did someone in authority declare that they had moved from Bell County and lived in Jefferson County long enough to be counted? Did they die many years later in a veterans hospital? I'm looking for help to answer this because I don't know. Now remember, the courthouse was built in 1837 on this public square where the pioneers as early as the 1780s had designated the 6th and Jefferson intersection as public ground. When the courthouse was built, and I did find one map from the 1850s to show us that this street, or is it an alley, or is it an access path or road for Jefferson County government officials, but this is called Court Place. It's part of a larger street system that goes all the way to 32nd Street in the west and all the way to 1st Street in the east, give or take a few jogs. That's called Congress Street. But nevertheless, this one block from the 1850s forward is called Court Place. And the image that I have to describe for you is that this would have been historically comparable to 1/4 of a Kentucky county seat town courthouse square. Private buildings with facades opening on to Court Place, law offices, commercial buildings, and even a hotel down on the corner. This was Court Place. There was a gigantic building here in 1875 called the Evans Block, and it was accompanied by a taller structure at the end. But this building dates to 1927, a private building. But what I really brought you here to show you is the very, very handsome pedestrian bridge that connects the courthouse of 1835-37 to a Jefferson County Courthouse annex. This handsome structure, built in 1900, this multi-level Venetian-style pedestrian bridge was built in handsome form to connect the building into which the criminal courts expanded. This building of 1900. And so, it gets lost in the shuffle. Can you agree? It's a handsome building with handsome window treatment, with ornamentation at the top, connected by this delightful pedestrian bridge. But no one sees it because it's tucked in tight on Court Place behind the Jefferson County Courthouse. The hotel down on the corner had its main entrance on 6th Street. It was called the St. Nicholas and later the Congress. But I want to show you what replaced it in 1938. The federal government, during the Great Depression of the 1930s, during which there was unprecedented unemployment, the federal government tried to put your great uncle and aunt back to work through, among other programs, the Works Progress Administration, the WPA. The federal government paid for this building, the Fiscal Court Annex. 1938, she is in Art Deco form. But do you know what I found out that just knocked my socks off? This building in 1938 was built 6 stories tall. In about 1950, they popped 4 additional stories up on the top. When they did that, the building lost some of its distinctive architectural character and looks a little more like Soviet brutalism. But it's the 1938, now 10-story Fiscal Court Annex. Oh, lordy, lordy, lordy. This palace of government was created in the early 1870s. This City Hall of 1871 is 1/3 of its planned size. You're looking at the side entrance. It was to extend all along Jefferson Street. This palace of government is testimony to Louisville's economic exuberance following the Civil War. We came out of that war smelling like a rose, unscathed by battle, unscathed by the destruction. And so, we built this palace of government. City mothers and fathers were anxious to get the mayor and the board of aldermen and the common council out of the basement offices in the Jefferson County Courthouse, which incidentally, the city of Louisville government built. And so as a result, we built this palace of government after extensive planning. In the triangle over the 6th Street entrance, there is a concrete stone billboard. That billboard tells us something about Louisville after the war. It tells us that, now this is my interpretation, that we learned after the Civil War, Louisville, formerly a western city, but after the Civil War, increasingly because of white racism, and we knew which side of the Ohio River our economic bread was buttered on, we learned to do what I call the Deep South hustle. We sent drummers, traveling salespeople from Main Street wholesale warehouses by the emerging rail lines of the L&N Railroad to every dusty crossroads of the emerging South. During the Deep South hustle, in fact, after the Civil War, we adopted this as the city seal. The steam locomotive with 1871 written on the cab, and the barrel of the locomotive has the word progress written across it. Now, this is my interpretation. I think it is significant that what's in front of that steam locomotive? A tree, but what kind of tree? A palm tree. The deep South hustle. But there's more civic testament in the stone embellishment of this palace of government from 1871, where the mayor and the board of aldermen and other city offices exist. Look at the menagerie of animals above the second-story windows. When we built this building, Louisville was the most prominent tobacco market in the world. We were second in this nation in the shipping of pigs. By 1890, we're going to be the nation's major manufacturer of blue jeans for country folk. This is a city countryside city hall, and we're celebrating the fact that we're selling barbed wire, we're selling plows, we're selling blue jeans, but we're using the meat for meat packing, the leather for tanning. We're also taking the grains for distilling and brewing, and we are also the world's major exporter of navigation rope made of hemp in those days for navigation rope. This is the City Hall of 1871. There's something I forgot to tell you. You see the clock tower? It was redesigned. For you see, they entered the building in 73, and when the building was 2 years old, guess what happened? This tower that had been built to hold a clock and to serve as an open cupola for fire watching. A firefighter stood in the tower and watched for fire and smoke among the short buildings in the city at that time. The only problem, when the building was 2 years old, a fire broke out in the fire watchtower, and it had to be redesigned in this French Empire style. So you have French Empire and Italianate style side by side in the redesigned clock tower by local architect Henry Whitestone. Now remember, this is only a third of the proposed City Hall. They ran low on money, and there was a Jefferson County jail next door, and they weren't ready to tear it down, so they weren't ready to build the full-size City Hall. But look at this figure above the Jefferson Street entrance. This mythological figure looks like Neptune with a crown on his head. And then, of course, there are the plaques that remind us of the mayors who were leading the city while the building was being built, as well as a plaque for John Andrew Wartha, the architect. Well, by 1907, they had torn down the Jefferson County Jail and built a new one. And instead of continuing the Italianate French Empire style of the City Hall, they chose instead this Beaux-Arts classical style with 12 gigantic columns supporting a portico with highly ornamented capitals on the top. But you know what I like about this city office building most? I like the lamps, the street lights that sit on the front porch. Do you see those ready-to-soar eagles at the base? They're my favorites, sitting right there, ready. The Republic is ready to fly. Now, in 1891, the city opened what's called Firehouse Number 2, but it really was Fire Department Headquarters, 1891. These windows, this is the Roman arch where the fire apparatus, in those days a horse-drawn steam pumper, came out every evening in what was called a joker. meaning they were testing the harness, testing the boiler, testing the alarm, testing readiness. And so people would come and gather around neighborhood and downtown firehouses at 6 o'clock p.m. for the Joker. This was Firehouse Number 2 Headquarters Company. You don't have any trouble believing that, do you? Look above the doors. You see in terracotta fire helmet, fire hose, fire axe, and the bugle, so that the commander of the fire company could call the shots. This building had a tower. Now, it's only a shadow of its former self. This tower had an open belfry. You can still see the base for the columns that supported the belfry over here. And that belfry housed fire emergency signaling equipment when it was built in 1891, and it also had a fire watcher to stand looking watch for fire and smoke among the shorter buildings in the center city. So the belfry was removed from the tower in the early 1930s. But the base, that is the base for those columns, still remains in this, the fire headquarters building of 1891. Now, you know, this next building is not handsome on its Jefferson Street face. It's the City of Louisville Police Headquarters building of 1954. Now, when you go around the corner onto 7th Street, you see it from a little more exciting angle. But you know, in order to make it handicap accessible, they built a gigantic concrete ramp from this intersection at the corner up to the 2nd story entrance of the 1954 Police Headquarters building. But I went across the street, and when I stood over on this side of the street, looking at what was designed to be almost a crude architectural companion to City Hall, facing east on the other end of the block, I saw with the twin flagpoles and this facade at least a better look on the police headquarters building than I'd ever seen before. The other day on the sidewalk, I ran into one of the junior architects on this project. You know what he told me? He said the senior architect was determined to build windowsills that pigeons couldn't sit on. And so as a result, you can see every windowsill is slanted enough and designed to be slippery enough that pigeons would slide off. But unfortunately, soon after the building was complete, the architect came and saw sticky-footed pigeons holding on to the slanted sills. In early 2000, we opened this new Jefferson County Courts building, the Jefferson County Judicial Center. I like the fanciful tower with its kind of decorative, playful top, and I certainly understand the connection between those columns, Greek Revival suggesting Greek Revival columns, but they're more modern, with the crown at the top of the columns, which is a conference room for the judges and others. This is where the courts, most of the courts meet, the Jefferson County courts meet, this judicial center. You know, there's a challenge here. This building is best appreciated with binoculars. Do you see those little green dots all around up in the front of the building? They are 6 to 10 ceramic tile representing scenes from Louisville's past. There is a scale of justice. There is the paddle wheel of the Belle of Louisville. There is the reflection, the dual reflection in the water of the Big Four Bridge. All of these and many, many more are on those ceramic tiles, these pictures of Louisville's past. But unfortunately, best read with binoculars. You know, there's one thing that I forgot to show you about the firehouse. Not only did we tell the story of the fire equipment above the fire engine door, but look at the bas-relief cameo portraits of the two men in the top of the building. That's Fire Chief Ed Hughes and the Assistant Fire Chief Ben Bates. They're up there on the front of the old firehouse of 1891. Now, this gigantic structure of concrete and glass was built in the mid-1970s to house the Hall of Justice. It was named for that kid who went to Male High School in the 1870s. He was the son of German Jewish immigrants here to Louisville. He went to Harvard University and then became a very wealthy attorney in Boston. He served a lot of pro bono work, advocating for better labor conditions in factories. He then was good friends of that son of the Presbyterian minister who was president at Princeton University, Woodrow Wilson. In 1916, the new president, Woodrow Wilson, named Louis D. Brandeis as the first Jewish member of the United States Supreme Court. But his confirmation by the U.S. Senate did not come easily. As the first Jewish member of the court, there were a lot of anti-Semitic arguments against Brandeis's confirmation. He was a strong justice. He served until 1939. Died in 1941. His wife Alice died in 1945. When she was dead, his family allowed Brandeis University in the Boston area to be named after him. You know what happened to the ashes, the cremated ashes of Alice and Louis Brandeis? They were buried under the front portico of the University of Louisville School of Law, which was not too many years ago renamed the Louis D. Brandeis School of Law. This is the Louis D. Brandeis Hall of Justice. Now, here in front of the Hall of Justice, there is a historical marker. That marker is for a brave and pioneering Louisvillian, an African-American attorney. His name, Charles W. Anderson, Jr. Charles W. Anderson was Kentucky's first African-American state legislator, elected in 1935 and served for 6 consecutive terms. He served 2 terms as the president of the National Bar Association, the racially separated Bar Association for African Americans. Charles W. Anderson was the first pioneering Southern black legislator in the 20th century. Now, there had been black legislators during Reconstruction in the South just after the Civil War, but he was the pioneering legislator among African Americans in the entire southern part of the United States. After he served in the state legislature, he was an assistant Commonwealth attorney and died tragically when he was 53 years of age at a grade crossing in Shelby County. His car was hit by a train. But when he began in Kentucky's legislature in 1936, he was just 28 years of age. Charles W. Anderson, Jr., pioneer African American. Now, I talked about public square, the public purpose of this entire intersection of 6th and Jefferson. Now, over closer to this next street, which you will notice is very close to Jefferson Street. This is a very short block along 6th Street. This corner was Green Street. You know why we think it was called Green Street? Because the public commons, the public green, was along that side of Green Street. By World War I, Green Street had become synonymous with prostitution in Louisville. Louisville's Tenderloin District flourished east and west along Green. It was World War I, and the federal government had proposed to locate an officers' training camp, what became known as Camp Zachary Taylor. We were competing with other cities for that important economic boost. Well, one of the things we did is we passed a taxi cab ordinance to try to regulate the use of cabs in prostitution. But perhaps more symbolic and visible than anything else, we renamed Green Street in an act of good economic sense and patriotic exuberance. We named it Liberty Street during World War I, got that officers' training camp out between Preston Highway and Poplar Level Road, Camp Zachary Taylor, where a Louisville neighborhood is now. This is Old Green Street, so named, we believe, because the public green was right here in what was believed in those days to be about as far south as the city would ultimately grow. We've mentioned several jails. The latest jail is on the top of the Louis D. Brandeis Hall of Justice. It's winding down, being replaced by the new Jefferson County Metropolitan Corrections, the new jail with just under 2,000 beds, just opened in early 2000. That jail is a rebuilt building. You remember, there is a 1964 Metropolitan Sewer District headquarter building in the center of the jail that has been rebuilt. The jail now has a new face, a new facade. The facade imitates and suggests the old 1906 jail that you see over on the opposite corner. 1905, 1906, we moved the jail from over next to City Hall over to this site of Old First Presbyterian Church. You know, this is the administration building for the jail. You can see the tower base where there were two modest belfries, two modest towers that used to be attached to the top. But look to your right. Those narrow windows, cell block windows, where bars once were. You can imagine in the mid-1970s when this old jail was beginning to fail, how the press delighted in reporting prisoners were breaking out, gaining their freedom, jumping out onto Liberty Street, they declared. This is the old jail of 1905, 1906. By the way, you see the statue there in the little niche? That's a statue that was given to us by France during the United States bicentennial in 1976. It is a replica of a statue done by Houdin. It is a statue that is in the museum at the cathedral at Versailles, and that is a statue of that military hero who helped us in the Revolution, Marquis de Lafayette. In 1985, hoodlums stole this 2,000-pound statue of Lafayette, and it was missing for a month. They found it in an alley out in the Beachmont neighborhood and brought it back and anchored it even better. Statue of Marquis de Lafayette. This is Jefferson Square. Now remember, this is Armory Place up on the right corner, formerly called Center Street. Center Street used to, not so long ago, go directly into Jefferson Street. In other words, there was a street right there between here and the tall building. This is a plaza, public plaza, where all God's children gather, called Thomas Jefferson Square. This is a place where we try to tell a lot of stories about the strength, the will, the heroism, the commitment to community of many of Louisville's citizens. One of the things we do is we celebrate our sister cities with the flags. Here is a monument, an eternal flame, that has the names of those peacekeepers, those police officers, city and county, all over Jefferson County, who have died in the line of duty. This eternal flame reminds us of their sacrifice as they have struggled to keep the peace in this community. This obelisk was created by public donation at the initiative of both the Louisville and the Jefferson County Fraternal Order of Police, the Eternal Flame, with the names of peacekeepers in the community who have died in the line of duty. Over here, we see a statue done by that late popular Louisville sculptor, Barney Bright. It is a bronze statue of a Louisville or Jefferson County or small department firefighter who is leading children from a burning blaze. This is the monument to those firefighters who have died in the line of duty. The statue captures the words in rhyme of the firefighter's prayer. Those words that Barney Bright highlighted are, "Be with me as I guide a child through the dark and smoky haze." Well, here's the firefighter with the infant child in his arms, holding the little girl's hand and leading them through the smoky haze to safety. Here is a representative plaque of the old firefighter steam apparatus. And here is a plaque showing new and more modern firefighting equipment. This statue by Barney Bright was done in about 1997. Well, you've all been troopers. We have followed one another on a course through public ground. This government center, this civic plaza, this place where there is a vibrant, living local government housed in many of these buildings. But we see more than just brick and stone. We see more than just bronze and marble. We see in functioning buildings and in the monuments and in the memorials a clue to our own identity. We begin to see what city citizenship means. People, average, ordinary folks just like ourselves, who in their dreaming, who in their commitment were capable of extraordinary creation and commitment to their community. I am glad that we have had the chance to learn about ourselves as we have seen these creations and symbols of commitment of the past. Thank you for joining me in this walk through the government center of downtown Louisville at 6th and Jefferson.
That's a jaunty little melody, isn't
Yes,
it?
it is.